Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Drunk Agile. With me, as always, is my friend and colleague.
Prateek.
My name is Daniel Vacanti, and we are doing our kind of on-site, as you can see, socially distanced.
Yeah, super distanced.
Super socially distanced version of Drunk Agile. This is a special edition because Prateek just stocked up for us. We've got a whole selection of bourbons that we're going to try. I contributed my one. But there are three here. I don't know. Do you want to introduce the three that we're going to be?
Sure. Well, I'll introduce the ones I brought in here. This is Stag Junior. It's 64.2%. It's pretty high for a bourbon. It is one of my favorites. It's actually, and we were talking about this earlier today. This is currently rated number 2 on the World Whiskey Scale by Jim Murray. The barrel?
Oh yeah. So, and I brought a barrel bourbon. It is I don't even know what strength. I don't know if it says what strength it is. Oh, there it is. Yeah, 58.3%. And it's 5 years old. So barrel's kind of an interesting type of whiskey. We'll leave it to you to go to the Googles and the interwebs to look up why barrel is slightly different than the other two that we've got here.
And the last one that we have here is Booker's Granny Batch. This is it's 63.2%. It's 6 years, 4 months, and 21 days. It's a special release from Booker's, which they named after their grandmother. So it's Booker's Granny Batch.
So by the way, that noise you hear in the background, unfortunately, the star of the show tonight, Nisha, decided to go be outside. But the dog that you do hear is our stand-in.
Yeah, we can bring him on camera just for show.
His name's Spartacus, or Farticus for short.
Yeah.
Oh, he's running away. So the way that we're going to do this in celebration of, and here's Spartacus for you, in celebration of the 3 bourbons that we have here tonight, we are going to do an edition of Drunk Agile where we are going to do our top three myths of Kanban, right? And so for each myth, Prateek will discuss his myth, I'll discuss my myth, and we will drink one of these whiskeys, and then by the end, we can vote, and then maybe you can vote on what your favorite myth and what your favorite whiskey is. So do you want to get us started?
Yeah,
Kick us off with myth number 3. We'll go 3, 2, 1. So starting with the third.
Third myth, at least on my list, is if you put up Post-its on a board, you're doing Kanban. Just Post-its on a whiteboard is Kanban. And we're here to bust the myth that Post-its on a whiteboard does not a Kanban make. And before we go any further with that, our first pour is the Stag Junior. And
cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, that's a nice sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were discussing this is it's very, very peppery. It is. It's good.
It's on the tongue. It's almost very, as you said earlier, un-bourbon-like.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's many people believe that if I just have a whiteboard, I make columns, and I put Post-its on it, I'm doing Kanban. There's a bit more that goes to it. That's a start. Yeah. That's definitely a start. You've started somewhere, but that in itself is not Kanban.
Yeah, let's not worry about work in progress limits.
Yeah.
Let's not worry about how long stuff is taking. Yeah. Let's not worry about improving, right? Hey, as long as, or we've got a Jira board, right? Or Jira, when you're starting your Jira project, has an option for Kanban. So of course, if we select that, we're doing Kanban for sure. So so that's myth number 3 for you. Myth number 3 for me is, and this might be a little heretical, is that every column for as you know, a Kanban board is made up of multiple columns. For every column on the board, must have a work in progress limit. A lot of people believe that, though, so that when you actually get around to limiting your work in progress, the Kanban dictates that for every column on your board, you have a work in progress limit. That is simply just not true. There are many, many, many ways to control work in progress. Column-based WIP limits are just one, and in many contexts, potentially one of the worst things that you can do. I know, do you want to talk about your favorite way to control work in progress?
Yeah, for me, the favorite way to say is it's pretend that your entire thing is a to-do, doing, done, and regardless of what columns you have, and there should always only be certain number of things in there, like a whole board wide width limit. That almost ensures that even if you got your because column width limits, you've got multiple chances to get things wrong. Board width limit, sure, you got it wrong, it's easier to adjust as well.
Yep. And there are many variations upon that theme. A lot of teams we work with, we have them just set a policy. It's like, for the number of people on the team, how many things do you want them to work on? Regardless of where it is on the board, how many things that, it's very, very similar to a whole board work in progress limit. You might do that. You might even do something as simple as, hey, we're going to agree not to start anything new until something has finished. That's another way to limit work in progress. So you've got all kinds of options, only one of which is every column on the board has to have a work in progress.
And both these myths are most likely an artifact of people seeing Kanban boards around the world and going, oh, that's what Kanban is. That's what it looks like. They're boards, there's stickies, and there's some numbers there. Common enough.
So that's myth. I don't know. Are we supposed to finish these before?
I don't know. I think if we finish these, we might not finish the video.
Yeah, because I don't know that I'll be able to talk, by the way. So I'm gonna leave that for the end. Moving on to myth number 2, which means that we need to go to whiskey number 2, which is the barrel bourbon. Hopefully by now you've had a chance to take a look at why barrel is unique. I've tried this before, and
I haven't. I've tried not this bottle, but yeah.
Yeah, you've tried
I've tried barrel before.
A version of it before. Yeah. So cheers. Let's see how this one goes, if it's as nice as the Stag.
That definitely has a more bourbon taste than
it's a
the
little.
Stag.
You can tell the difference in alcohol too.
Yeah,
right?
you can definitely. It doesn't punch you in the face.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't get up and slap you around and then throw you back down, right? So it's a little bit smoother, I think, from an alcohol perspective. Taste is not as dramatic though. I think the Stag is a little bit.
Yeah, Stag's got
a little bit more pronounced.
I think Stag's got higher notes and lower notes. This has mostly lower.
It is much, but it is much. I think a little bit more even. Like I said, just a hair more smooth. But I think that's just the alcohol talking there.
Just like this podcast. This is like this video. It's mostly the alcohol talking.
What myth number 2? Do you want to go?
Myth number 2. For me, the myth number 2 is the thing about Kanban is for maintenance and support. Meanwhile, Scrum is for new development work. That's another common one that we hear all the time. That if you're doing maintenance and support work where things are showing up randomly, you use Kanban. But if you're doing development work that needs to be planned out and all that, you do Scrum.
Yep. The reason that's probably one of the biggest myths out there, in my opinion anyway, is because going back to the very first implementation of Kanban that I was involved with anyway, which I apologize. Maybe we might need to move.
Might need to move Spartacus somewhere because he's.
So I'm going to drone on while Prateek goes and takes care of the dog. Ignore any of those sounds in the background. One of the reasons I think that's one of the biggest myths out there is because, as I was saying, going back to the very, very first Kanban implementation, and certainly pretty much every Kanban implementation that I've done since then has been, and here's the star of the show, here's Nisha, has been actually for project work. It hasn't been for maintenance and support work. It's been actually for doing complex product development work or complex, just any project work. And there's
Nisha.
So we replaced one dog and we got another.
This is how we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So that's why I think maintenance and support work is Kanban for maintenance and support work is one of the biggest myths out there.
Yeah, I don't remember how long ago this was. It was 4 or 5 years ago, and we were sitting somewhere in a group, and someone asked a question about, well, I use Kanban for my maintenance teams.
I was drunk that night too, by the way.
And I use Scrum for my dev teams. What metrics should I look at? And well, I won't go fully into the story, but it was interesting how people naturally assume that throughput and cycle time matter for one type of work. Meanwhile, velocity and story points matter for another kind of work. Whereas, frankly, things like throughput and cycle time, they're flow metrics. They exist whether you want them to exist or not.
Yep.
And they matter whether you want them to matter or not. So regardless of the type of work, they're there.
And they matter to your customers, whether you think they matter to your customers or not. I think that's maybe one of the more important, and they're in the language of the customer, which is so important. But sorry, so that's myth number 2 for you. Myth number 2 for me is kind of piggybacking off of every column on a board needs to have a work in progress limit. Mm-hmm. Along with that, people think the second that you limit work in progress, that every item on your board has to be exactly the same size, which is a huge myth. Because number one, I don't even know how you would do that. And then it gets into the whole Bill Clinton. It depends on what your meaning of size is.
That's not exactly what he said.
Yeah, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, whatever. But it's like, are we talking about relative complexity? Are we talking about cycle time? I mean, what do we really mean by size? But the thing is, even if you could define what size meant, and even if you could get everything to be the same size, you probably wouldn't, because the amount of overhead that introduced, the amount of unnecessarily complexity that would introduce, the amount of whatever that would introduce would probably more than destroy any benefit from a predictability or variability perspective that you might see.
Yeah, and I do think this myth comes from the fact that when we talk about throughput, we essentially say every ticket that got done was one ticket. And we don't really say, oh, this ticket was this heavy and this ticket was this heavy. I think when we say that, people somehow assume that those tickets have to be the same size because you're counting them as the same weight.
Yep.
So,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think not only from a throughput perspective, but just from a general WIP limit, like how can you have a column that has a work in progress limit of 2, where one of those items is a story point of 13 and one of those items is a story point of 1. And what people fail to understand is, if that is really the range of items that you have in your system, whether they're the same size and fit under the work in progress limit is the least of your problems. You've got so many other things that you really need to be worrying about. The fact that they're not the same size is really not where you should be focusing your energy. So that's number 2. Same size on mine, and
maintenance and support, Scrum versus Kanban.
Yep. Which brings us to the granddaddy, or shall I say the granny of them all, our third whiskey. Do you want to introduce our
this is the Booker's Granny Batch. This again is their special release that they do, I think, once a year. And again, it's named after the grandmother of the first distiller of Booker's.
I imagine she was a whiskey drinker. I hope she was. Anyway, so here's to you, Granny. Cheers.
Oh, that's super peppery at the end.
I was gonna say it's almost grassy.
Yeah, that's herbal peppery at the end. It starts off a lot like the Stag, actually.
It does, but
it ends completely different.
Yeah. How much? What was the? Did we say what the alcohol?
63 point something.
63.2. Yeah. So, yeah, it looks like Dan's getting an Uber home. All right, so
Michelle drive you.
So if we're talking about the granny of them all, then let's talk about the granny of all myths. Prateek, what is your?
For me, this one is one's interesting because even people considered Kanban experts believe this, and through no fault of their own, really. They've learned it this way, which is you have to start with where you are. That you have to take your system exactly as it is right now and then make small tweaks to it. and I get why people believe it, because on the surface, it sounds logical that making small tweaks is the way to go. But what we have observed, at least, is in practice, we have done this multiple times where we have taken the team and said, okay, let's just map out how you're supposed to work. How would you ideally work? And let's make that your process. Let's start with that, and then we'll see where we go. And that seems to work really well. Not saying that start with where you are doesn't work, but it's not the only way to start or to introduce Kanban.
Yeah, as you've probably heard us talk about Darren Davis a lot on this call or this podcast, whatever we're calling it.
Yeah.
And one of his, so for those of you who don't know, Darren Davis was kind of the guy who started Kanban, he and his team at Corbis. But one of the things he likes to say about starting with where you are now is, if where you are right now is broken and you know it's broken and it's so broken that you want to try something else, why would you start there, right? I mean, why would you do that? So to Prateek's point, yes, I mean, there's certain contexts where maybe starting with where you are now works. We're not saying don't do that. What we're saying is the myth is that it's a requirement that you have to take where you are now. This gets into the whole ideas of idealized design and things like that, but don't buy into the myth that, I can't do Kanban unless I start exactly where I am right now.
Yeah,
it's just not true.
Think about if you are a sports fan, think about if your team was really struggling one season. You won't say, we'll just change this one small thing next season, and then we're going to do this. No, usually it is, okay, we're obviously missing some tools. Let's bring in people. Let's overhaul this and rebuild this season so that we can start winning.
Yep. Sometimes it is just swapping out one player or maybe change, but most of the time, yeah, it's like we need a clean house and there's Nisha over there. I wonder what this is going to look like in post, but whatever.
I think it's going to be more of the dogs talking than us talking. So that was my myth number one. What about you, Dan?
And if you're regular watchers of the show or you've seen any of my talks, everybody knows that I can't do any discussion with Kanban without bringing up the whole notion of class of service. And for me, the granny of them all with Kanban is that you have to use what's called class of service with Kanban. And this is that notion of we can split our work into different levels of priority, different levels of treatment, really. So like, and we can have items that we're going to expedite, we're going to focus on, or items, our standard ones that kind of just flow through normally, or fixed state ones that we know because this has to be done by a certain date, maybe we'll treat it differently, or we have what's called intangible ones that we're not really sure about the value. Maybe it's valuable, maybe it's not. So they can be kind of the longer, slow burner ones. And this idea that you have to not only classify, but I would argue stratify your system design around these classes of service, huge myth. If anything, I would say, start your Kanban implementation without any notion of class of service, and only add them in if you think they're necessary. And my guess is you will find out that you just don't need them at all.
Yeah, it's what's interesting for me, and again, these two myths go hand in hand, is folks who say start with where you are the same ones who go, take all these class of service things and add them to your system. And that's a little incongruous, at least in my head. But yeah, it goes sort of, and I think, and if you've seen Dan talk about this, if you heard him talk about this, you're all about how it goes almost counter to flow, to the principles of flow, to the metrics of flow when you start doing this.
Yeah. You can see product managers, product owners' eyes light up when you say you can offer them this thing called expedite, and they're like, "Oh, you mean I can expedite something, right? I can." And I was working. I think I may have mentioned this example on this before, but working with a client who had an expedite process as part of their Kanban system, but there was only ever supposed to be one thing in that expedite process. Walked into the office one day, there were 33 things in that expedite lane. The second that you offer an expedite to a product owner, guess what? Everything becomes an expedite.
Yeah, I remember being on a team and we did offer expedites, and we were, this was when we were running people's payrolls. We did offer expedites, and it was amazing. The clear signal was that our standard story cards were like 3x5s, index cards, but our expedite cards were the small Post-its, because there were so many of them that you had to fit them in the column, and the actual cards could fit like 4 of them if we wanted to.
So there you have it. So counting your top 3 down 3, 2, 1 are
the Post-its on a whiteboard is Kanban. Kanban is for maintenance and support, and Scrum is for product development. And you have to start with where you are.
And for me, it was the number 3 is every column on a Kanban board needs to have a work in progress limit. Mm-hmm. Then once you limit work in progress, then every item has to be of the same size. And then the last one, of course, is if you're doing Kanban, you have to use class of service. So having said that, now it's time for us, I think, to reveal. Are you ready to vote on?
Yeah, I think I am.
Maybe 3, 2, 1.
I think I am. I think I'm gonna go with Barrels 3 for me, Booker's 2, and Stag's 1.
I'm gonna go slightly different. For me, the Granny is number 3. It's just, like I said, it's just a little bit too grassy on the finish for me. Then the Barrel for number 2, and I think by far,
yeah, Stag's definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think these two are close. I do think these two are close, but yeah, that's.
So that's it. I hope you have enjoyed this version of Drunk Agile. Apologize for.
Yeah, I was gonna say we should have asked the dogs what their 3, 2, 1 was, because they were as chatty as we were on this one.
Yeah, so hopefully we can maybe fix some of those background noises. But as always, for Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vicanti, and we will see you in the next episode. Good night, everybody.